Hello there, my sleepy fellows. I'm ever so glad you've joined me tonight. The hour is soft and slow, and all of Middle-earth seems to have settled into stillness. Here in the quiet green of the Shire, the sky glows with the last hues of twilight, painting the hills in shades of lavender and gold. The round doors of Hobbit holes are closed, warm lights flickering from within. A gentle breeze carries the scent of pipeweed, fresh earth, and the faint perfume of blooming heather. Beyond the hills, the stars begin to shimmer into view, each one a memory of ages long past. And tonight, under their watchful glow, we turn our hearts eastward to a tale carved deep into the stone of history and even deeper into the hearts of dwarves. It is a tale not only of battle, but of brotherhood, of courage, loyalty, and sorrow. Tonight, we remember Fili and Kili, the youngest of Thorin Oakenshield's company, brave, bright-hearted dwarves who met their fate at the edge of the lonely mountain. So, wrap your blanket close, dear listener, let your eyes grow heavy, and allow the story to guide you gently, like a stream over stones, into a peaceful night's dream. Before we begin the gentle unfolding of this tale, let me speak to you softly, as one friend to another beneath the starlight of Middle-earth. Tonight's journey is one of quiet remembrance, of two dwarven brothers whose story is etched in bravery and sorrow, wrapped in the deep roots of loyalty and love. Fili and Kili were young, perhaps too young for war, but their hearts were fierce and true, and their courage would shape the course of dwarven history. In this slow and soothing telling, we will follow their path from the merry days in the Blue Mountains to the final stand beneath the shadow of Erebor. But do not worry, dear listener. Even though the tale carries the weight of loss, it also glows with the warmth of brotherhood, laughter, and the gentle strength of kinship. You are safe here. Let the rhythm of my voice and the gentle cadence of the story help you unwind, breathe deeply, and ease slowly into rest. If you enjoy this story, if the soft rustle of Middle-earth's leaves or the distant echo of dwarven songs bring peace to your heart, then I invite you to stay a while. Like, subscribe, or simply return whenever your heart seeks comfort and your mind longs for rest beneath the stars. There are many more tales waiting, stories of hidden magic, quiet heroes, and ancient places that whisper secrets to those who listen closely. But tonight, let us follow Fili and Kili. Let us remember their laughter around a campfire, the strength in their hearts as they stood beside their uncle, and the quiet echo of their names that still lingers in the stone halls of Erebor. Now, close your eyes, and we shall begin. In the quiet corners of the Blue Mountains, where pine forests sigh in the wind and cold rivers carve ancient paths through stone, there lived two young dwarves, Fili and Kili. Their laughter could often be heard echoing through the stone halls of their people, warm and light like firelight flickering on carved walls. Though born into exile, the two brothers carried within them the golden pride of Durin's line. They were princes of a kingdom lost, but never forgotten. Fili, the elder by a handful of winters, bore the quiet weight of responsibility. His golden hair was braided in the style of warriors past, and his keen blue eyes always watched the path ahead with care. He was brave, steady, and thoughtful, like the mountain oak that bends with the wind but never breaks. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words held the quiet authority of one born to lead. Kili, younger and bolder, moved like sunlight skipping across stone. With a mischievous smile and eyes full of wonder, he would often be the first to leap into the unknown, his bow always close and his laughter even closer. He was a creature of open skies and distant trails, ever chasing the echo of ancient stories and forgotten paths. Where Fili was the steady hand, Kili was the curious heart. Their bond, as brothers, was deep and unbreakable, woven not just by blood, but by endless days of shared adventure, late-night whispers in the dark, and a love that needed no words. They were raised by their mother, Dis, sister to Thorin Oakenshield, and the last Dwarodam of royal lineage. Under her fierce protection and watchful eye, they grew strong, not only in body, but in heart and honor. When the time came for Thorin to gather his company and reclaim the lonely mountain, Fili and Kili did not hesitate. Though young, they stood tall among warriors, eager to prove their worth and to walk beside their uncle into legend. The lands around them were changing. Whispers of dragons and shadowed lands stirred once more, and the wind from the east carried old names: Erebor, Smog, gold beneath the mountain. But for Fili and Kili, it was not treasure that called them, it was home. A home they had never seen, but had carried in their hearts since childhood. And so began their journey, two young dwarves stepping into a tale larger than themselves, walking the same roads once trodden by their ancestors. Their story would become legend, but tonight we remember it not in song or stone, but in soft murmurs beneath a sleeping sky. Now, close your eyes and let the tale unfold. The Blue Mountains, or Arid Luin, as they were known in the Elder tongue, lay beneath an endless sky of drifting clouds and soft sunlight. There, carved into the ancient stone, were the scattered halls of the dwarves who had lost Erebor to dragonfire. In one such hall, nestled against the slope of a wooded hill, Fili and Kili lived with their mother Dis, a proud Dwarodam with dark hair lined with silver and a gaze that saw through stone. Each morning began the same. The brothers would rise before the sun touched the peaks, when the hearth still glowed softly with last night's embers. Fili, ever dutiful, would tend the coals, feeding them fresh wood until the kitchen filled with gentle warmth. Kili, usually still wrapped in furs, would grumble from the other room, his voice muffled under heavy wool blankets. "Fili, ek cup of tea willna make itself," he'd mutter, and Fili would smile, shaking his head, already steeping herbs Dis had dried in bundles above the hearth. Once fed, the brothers would begin their day, Fili in the training yard, practicing with sword and axe under the watchful eye of old Balric, a veteran of the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. His barked commands echoed through the halls like the ringing of hammers. Kili, meanwhile, could more often be found climbing the rocky ledges outside the gates, bow in hand, tracking wild goats or chasing birds through tangled pine. His fingers were always stained from sketching what he saw in a leather-bound journal, drawings of strange symbols as he found carved into old stones or distant ridges he swore held secrets no one else could see. Their days were rich with rhythm, meals at midday when the halls filled with laughter and the scent of roast meats, evenings spent beside Dis as she sang the songs of Durin's line, her voice low and steady. And at night, long after the others had gone to bed, Fili and Kili would sit near the fire, sharing quiet words. "I heard Uncle Thorin's planning something," Kili said one evening, poking the fire with a stick. Fili glanced up. I've heard it too. Whispered talk of a journey, of Erebor." Kili's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Do you think he'll take us?" Fili didn't answer at once. He gazed into the fire. "We're young, but we're ready. If it comes, we go." And though the thought stirred excitement in their hearts, it was also laced with something quieter, an ache, a pull, as though some thread within them had begun to hum. It began not long after. At first, it was little things. Fili noticed that when he sparred in the yard, his sword moved more easily, almost as if guided by an unseen hand. Kili's arrows struck truer than they ever had, even when loosed in haste or high wind. "I think the mountain calls to us," Kili whispered one night as they stood outside watching the stars. "Not the blue mountains, the other one, Erebor." Fili frowned, but said nothing. One day, while out wandering the hills, Kili found something strange. Tucked beneath the roots of an ancient tree was a shard of carved stone, black as obsidian, etched with runes he could not read. He brought it home, cradled in his pack like something precious. "I found this near the old watchtower ruins," he told Fili, laying it out on the table. Fili studied it, running his fingers along the grooves. "These are royal runes, old Kuzdul. It speaks of a door, one that leads beneath." Their mother, when shown the shard, grew silent. "You'd do well to leave such things alone," she said softly. "Some doors were never meant to be reopened." But the brothers were restless now. A fire kindled deep inside. They began to ask questions of old miners, of stonemasons, of elders who remembered the old days. Tales emerged like embers from the past, of secret ways carved by the folk of Durin, of tunnels long lost, of maps drawn in ash and gold. One night, Balric pulled Fili aside. "Your uncle searches for a key," the old warrior said. "A key to a door only he remembers. The lonely mountain sleeps, lad, but in its heart, the dragon still dreams." The wind shifted that week, cold from the east. Kili stood one morning on the overlook and swore he saw a shape move across the distant pass, tall, robed, leaning on a staff. "I think someone's watching," he whispered. And Fili, though skeptical, admitted that he too had felt a presence, like eyes in the dark, not hostile, but ancient. Something waiting. They began preparing in secret. Kili sharpened his arrows. Fili restrapped the leather on his sword hilt. They trained harder, rose earlier, stayed up later. The quiet days of routine now held a subtle tension, like breath held just before the leap. Still, they laughed, they joked, they teased one another and filled the hall with joy. But it was a joy tinged with expectation. They were dwarves of Durin, born for more than exile. As spring bloomed and the mountains softened with meltwater and moss, the world outside began to shift. Travelers spoke of strange creatures moving in the woods, of lights over the hills, of rumors that Thorin Oakenshield had been seen in Bree. Kili clutched the shard he had found and whispered, "It's coming." Fili nodded, "Soon." And so, in the twilight of those final peaceful weeks, Fili and Kili stood at the edge of something vast. They did not yet know the shape of their fate, but in the hush of the evening, as stars blinked into the sky and the fire crackled low, they could feel it stirring, the first breath of legend. Spring had cast its full blessing upon the Blue Mountains. Snow had melted into silver streams, and the hills now breathed with the scent of blooming heather and damp earth. Yet even in the fullness of that gentle season, Fili and Kili began to notice that the world around them was changing, subtly but unmistakably. It began with the trees. On their frequent wanderings beyond the outer halls, Kili was the first to notice how certain pines bent ever so slightly eastward, their needles trembling as if stirred by a breeze no one could feel. Birds would fall silent as the brothers passed, and once a lone hawk circled them thrice before vanishing behind the ridgeline without a sound. Fili, ever more grounded than his brother, shrugged off the signs at first. But even he could not ignore the stone arch they stumbled upon one misty morning, half sunken, draped in ivy, with a rune etched at its crown that glimmered faintly in the dim light. The marking was unmistakable, Durin's crest. "Why here?" Kili whispered, brushing the moss away with reverent fingers. "These are old stones, lost stones." Fili knelt beside him, tracing the carved line of a mountain beneath a rising sun. "This isn't on any of the maps, and yet it feels familiar," Kili said softly, his voice trailing into the breeze. Later that week, they returned to the site at dusk, lanterns in hand. As night deepened and their light flickered against the stone, Kili leaned close, studying the arch. "Fili," he whispered, "it's humming." Fili placed his hand flat upon the stone. Indeed, it was true. A faint vibration pulsed beneath the surface, like the echo of distant drums deep within the mountain. The hum seemed to flow through his palm and settle into his chest, calm, steady, ancient. "Magic," Fili murmured, "old magic." From that night on, the brothers began to wander further, guided by instinct and that ever-present pull. They followed narrow trails that no other dwarf seemed to notice, through glades where the grass grew taller than their knees, where the moonlight pooled like water, and fireflies shimmered in unnatural patterns, slow, spiraling, always pointing eastward. In a small clearing one twilight, they found a ring of stones, smooth, rounded, weathered with age. In its center stood a tree, gnarled and wide, with bark as black as coal and leaves like silver coins. It was silent there, utterly still. Kili stepped forward, eyes wide. "Do you feel it?" Fili nodded. The air was thick with a kind of memory, as if the place had once held song, long ago, before the world had changed. and then came the light. From beneath the roots, a soft glow began to rise, no brighter than starlight, yet clear, cool, and unmistakably deliberate. Kili knelt, brushing aside earth and leaf litter until his fingers touched smooth stone. It was a small disc, no larger than a coin, carved with runes that shimmered blue in the moonlight. "I've seen these before," Fili whispered, "in the old tomes Balin kept." They brought the disc back to their halls, hiding it in a cloth pouch, sharing it only with one another. That night, dreams came. Fili saw a hall beneath a mountain, vast and empty, lined with stone pillars that stretched into shadow. A fire burned in the center, but no one tended it. The flames danced on their own, casting golden light onto a great anvil where a broken sword lay waiting. Kili dreamed of a narrow bridge over a chasm, deeper than any cave. On the other side stood a throne carved of obsidian, and behind it, a doorway sealed with runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. Neither spoke of their dreams at first, but as days passed and the pull grew stronger, they could no longer remain silent. "They're calling to us," Kili said, his voice quiet as they sat beside the stream near the glade. "Not just to Erebor, something older, something deeper." Fili looked at him long. "You're sure?" Kili only nodded. "I don't know why, but I know we're meant to follow." And so they did. Their excursions took on new purpose. Each path they walked revealed something: a rune etched into stone, a flickering torch long extinguished, or the hushed sound of a flute playing far away with no visible source. They began to mark the places on a hand-drawn map, and to their surprise, a pattern began to emerge. The symbols, the trees, the stone arches, all pointed toward a single region, long abandoned, where the mountains rose sharp and jagged, and tales told of roads carved before the coming of Durin himself. But it was not only signs they found. One evening, as twilight deepened into velvety blue, they saw a figure standing atop a ridge, clad in gray, tall and still, leaning on a staff that glowed faintly at the tip. "Fili," Kili whispered. "I see him," Fili replied, breath catching. The figure did not speak, did not move, simply watched. And then, as a cloud passed before the moon, he was gone. Not vanished with sound, but faded, like mist under morning sun. Back in the halls, Dis noticed the change in her sons. They spoke less, but their eyes shone brighter, they stood straighter. They moved as if already marching to a silent drumbeat no one else could hear. One night, as she passed by their room, she heard them whispering over the map. "You remind me of your father," she said from the doorway. The brothers looked up, surprised. "He walked roads like these," she continued, "followed signs no one else believed in. It cost him much, but he found what he sought." Fili rose and walked to her. "Do you think we're ready?" Dis placed a hand on his cheek, then on Kili's shoulder. "No one is ever ready, but some are called nonetheless." And so, the days passed, marked by signs and songs, glowing stones and quiet dreams. Fili and Kili were no longer simply heirs to a lost kingdom. They were being woven into something far older than Erebor's throne, something hidden in the folds of the land, in the breath of the wind, and in the silent waiting of forgotten halls. Magic had awakened, and it had chosen them. The sun had not yet set, though its warm golden glow had begun to stretch longer shadows across the valley below. The gentle wind stirred the grass on the hilltops, whispering through the trees like an old memory trying to speak once more. In the distance, the blue mountains shimmered faintly beneath the sky's soft orange hues. From the hill's crest, a hidden glade opened like a secret passage into the forest. Here, the trees grew older, their twisted roots thick with moss, and their bark gnarled from centuries of listening to the world pass by. It was beneath these ancient branches that the air felt heavier, and time seemed to slow, inviting stillness. The dwarf, who had followed no clear path, but rather the feeling of a memory unspoken, stepped gently into the shadowed grove. His name was Owen, an old dwarf who once sat at the fire beside Fili and Kili long ago. His hands, now marked by age, held tightly to a folded piece of parchment, one written in the prince's own hand, sealed with a quiet, "If I do not return." He had come seeking answers, not vengeance nor battle, only a whisper of truth. As he passed beneath the low-hanging branch, the grove deepened into quiet. The wind no longer stirred, the birdsong had faded, even the sound of his own footsteps seemed to muffle beneath a thick earthen hush. And then he saw it, a stone no larger than a hobbit's dinner plate, round and worn smooth, set carefully into the ground, as if placed there by hands that had long since vanished. Upon it, faintly glowing beneath layers of time and shadow, were carved dwarvish runes. The language was old, older than Erebor, older than Thorin's hall, and it shimmered now with a pale blue light, as though the words themselves had been waiting to be read. Oin knelt beside it. He brushed the moss aside with a tenderness rarely seen in dwarves. The stone was warm, as if the sun had touched it not long ago, though no light fell upon it here. He leaned closer. The runes whispered beneath his breath. The sons of Durin fell, not in shadow, but in honor. Their courage lights the path still unseen. And then, as if stirred by the breath of memory, the air shifted. A low hum began, soft and melodic, like a distant harp strung by wind alone. It vibrated faintly in the stone beneath his fingertips. The trees swayed gently, as if bowing, and the light from above seemed to change in hue, deeper, richer, as though tinged with the gold of ancient torches long extinguished. Oin closed his eyes. For a moment, just a moment, he wasn't alone. In the edges of his thoughts, two young voices laughed, a shared jest over breakfast, a smile passed between brothers, the sound of boots against stone, swords being drawn in unison, the glint of sunlight on golden braids. The vision was brief, a flicker in the mind, but it settled like warm embers in his chest. And then it was gone. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the stillness once more. But something had changed. The runes now glowed softly, no longer pulsing, but simply resting, as if acknowledged, as if the memory had been seen. On rose to his feet. There was no revelation, no thunder from the skies, No ghosts nor guardians appearing in radiant light, only the peace of truth, the quiet reassurance that what was lost was not forgotten, that Fili and Kili's final stand still echoed here, not in sorrow, but in the stillness of the mountain glade, held sacred by the land that bore their last breath. The dwarf turned slowly, his hand brushing once more against the stone. He didn't take it with him. He didn't need to. As he stepped away from the clearing, he noticed something he hadn't before. A trail, not carved, but gently worn, as if feet had passed here once and left behind no damage, only direction. It led deeper into the forest, toward the western slopes of the mountains. He paused, and then, with quiet resolve, he followed. The first glimpse into the mystery had not answered every question, but it had given something more precious than certainty, hope, a thread of connection between what had been and what might still be, a promise that memory, when honored gently, could open doors no sword ever could. And behind him, in the fading light, the grove held its silence once more. But for those who listened closely, there, just at the edge of hearing, two voices still lingered in the wind. A laugh, a promise, a bond, unbroken. And so, my sleepy fellows, we find ourselves drifting deeper into the tale, where the echoes of battle fade into quiet moments of memory. As the moon climbed higher over the lonely mountain and the fields of Erebor fell silent once more, the hush of night carried a softer sorrow, one that lingered not on clashing swords, but on the warmth of hearts now stilled. Thorin Oakenshield had been laid to rest, his hands gently cradling the Arkenstone, his proud brow free of the burdens he bore in life. And beside him, as the dwarves of Erebor gathered in solemn ceremony, were Fili and Kili, his loyal kin, his beloved nephews, who had given all they had for honor and kinship. Now, beneath the mountain's great stone halls, candlelight flickered across stone-carved walls, casting long shadows that danced with the memories of days gone by. Balin sat in quiet thought, his old hands folded upon his lap. He had known many ages and many brave souls, but the loss of the young princes weighed heavier than most. Bilbo Baggins, too, lingered, no longer rushing to pack his belongings and return to the Shire. He sat alone in a small chamber, the softest fire burning low beside him. The map of their journey, once marked with excitement and hope, now seemed a parchment of echoes. His fingers traced the faint inked lines, pausing near the symbol of the lonely mountain. He remembered Fili's laughter, warm, quick, so full of life. He remembered Kili's eagerness, his curious spirit, and how his eyes lit up with wonder. There had been a time, not long ago, when they all sat beside this very fire, speaking of simple things, meals, songs, the glow of stars. Now, the silence where their voices once rang felt far louder than any din of battle. Outside, a gentle snow had begun to fall again, though the storm was long past. It drifted through the air like feathers, each flake a whisper of something eternal. The dwarves spoke softly in the halls, their voices low as they recalled stories of the brothers' youth, of Fili's swift swordplay, of Kili's daring climbs across the mountain crags. Dis, their mother, had not arrived yet, for the road from the Blue Mountains was long and cold. But messages had been sent, carried by raven and rider alike. Thorin had made his final peace. The line of Durin, though broken in blood, would never be forgotten. And in that stillness, something gentle began to stir in the hearts of the company. There was pain, yes, but also a kind of peace, a knowing that the tale of Fili and Kili was not simply one of sorrow. It was one of bravery, loyalty, and the quiet strength of choosing love over fear, duty over comfort. Ori wrote by candlelight, his quill steady despite the tears that often blurred his vision. He would preserve the tale, not for history's sake alone, but for remembrance, for generations of dwarves to come who would know the names of Fili and Kili not as fallen warriors, but as bright stars who once shone against the shadow. In the days that followed, the mountain hummed with soft labor, not of forges clanging, but of stoneworkers carving 2 statues in the mountain's heart. One bore Fili's calm strength, the other Kili's youthful boldness, each forever watching over Erebor as they had in life. And one evening, under a sky scattered with stars, Thorin's company gathered around a quiet hearth. No grand speeches were made, no songs of mourning sung. Instead, they shared small tales of laughter, of pranks, of Fili's favorite dish and Kili's favorite tune. It was in these simple recollections that the deepest truths lived. Balin raised his cup. "Let it be known," he said gently, "that Fili and Kili did not fall in vain. They stood when others faltered, they fought when others fled, and they loved fiercely this land, this people, and each other." Even the mountain seemed to sigh then, a quiet rumble echoing deep below, as though Durin himself had heard. Bilbo smiled through misty eyes. He would return to the Shire in time, but tonight he stayed. Tonight he remembered. And you, dear listener, as you drift in the warmth of your blankets and the hush of night, perhaps you, too, feel the story lingering like the glow of firelight upon stone. The tale of Fili and Kili is not just a sorrowful one. It is a tale of hearts that burned brightly, of courage gently lived, and of the kind of strength that echoes far beyond the battlefield. So rest now, sleepy fellows. Let your dreams carry you through the halls of Erebor, past the golden chambers and silent statues, to the very heart of the mountain where memory lingers and love never fades. As the days gently passed beneath the golden sky of late autumn, the company of Thorin, now fewer in number, began to part ways. The battle of the Five Armies had come and gone, and though the mountain was reclaimed and peace slowly settled like snow upon its slopes, the world beyond still beckoned. It was Balin who first chose to travel, not to leave behind the mountain, but to carry its memory elsewhere. He wished to see once more the world beyond Erebor and visit old friends. Before he departed, he stood for a long while before the statues of Fili and Kili, his hand resting lightly on the stone, whispering words meant only for the 2 brothers and the echoes of time. Owain and Gloin remained behind, tending to matters of healing and honor, while Bilbo prepared to begin his long journey back to the Shire. And so, The tale took to the road once more, quiet, gentle, steady as a river's path. Bilbo rode a small pony, his pack light, his heart a touch heavier than when he'd first set out so many moons ago. The map Thorin had gifted him, now folded carefully in his pocket, seemed to hum with unspoken memories. Each landmark along the way, the curve of a familiar hill, the scent of pine carried by the breeze, awakened recollections like the turning of pages in a well-worn book. It was near the forest's edge, beneath the watchful trees of Mirkwood, that Bilbo met his first gentle companion on the road. He had stopped to rest beside a quiet stream. The light dappled through golden leaves above, when a voice, low and lyrical, spoke from the trees. "You walk with memory, little one." Bilbo turned to see a tall figure, cloaked in greens and browns, an elf whose eyes glowed like the stars. There was no fear, only wonder, as the elf stepped forward and sat beside him. "I am Linthariel of the Woodland Realm," she said with a soft smile. "I felt sorrow in the wind and followed it here." Bilbo nodded slowly. "I've just come from Erebor, from Friends Lost." Linthariel looked toward the sky, her voice becoming a song. "The wind carries their names, we remember." Together, they sat beneath the trees and spoke, not of battles and kings, but of laughter by campfires, of Fili's quick wit and Kili's bright spirit. Linthariel shared stories of her own, of dwarves who once journeyed through Mirkwood, of alliances forged in silence, of songs sung beneath starlit boughs. As evening fell and Linthariel prepared to return to her realm, she pressed into Bilbo's hand a small leaf-shaped token carved from amber. "For remembrance," she said, "so their light may walk with you." Further along the road, as the forests gave way to rolling hills and twilight skies, Bilbo encountered another quiet companion, a Dunedain ranger whose campfire glowed softly among the stones. The man's name was Halros, tall and weathered, his cloak bearing the scent of wind and wood. He offered Bilbo bread and tea without question, his silence a comfort rather than a mystery. "You've the look of one who's carried stories far," Halros remarked quietly as they sat beneath the stars. Bilbo chuckled gently. "I suppose I have. Some heavier than others." Halros nodded. "The world forgets too quickly, but out here on the road, we remember for those who cannot. That is why I walk." He then shared tales not found in books, of the ruins of ancient keeps, of hidden groves where the stars sing, of whispers in the wind that sound like old names. As the fire crackled and the moon climbed high, Bilbo found himself telling the tale of Fili and Kili, not as warriors, but as brothers, as sons, as lights in the darkness. And Halros listened with the reverence of one who knew the weight of memory. When dawn arrived and Bilbo prepared to depart, Halros gave him a small pouch of herbs. "For rest," he said, "and dreams free of shadow." The road wound on, gentle beneath Bilbo's feet. Days turned soft, and even the wind seemed to walk beside him. In a quiet glade not far from the borders of the Shire, Bilbo's path crossed one final soul, an old woman cloaked in faded blue, her eyes deep as the sea. She sat by a circle of stones, her hands weaving dried flowers into wreaths. "I have seen many pass this way," she said as Bilbo approached, "but you carry a stillness that others leave behind." They spoke in slow circles, her words weaving between stories and questions, never quite direct, but always true. She seemed to know of Fili and Kili, though she did not say how. Instead, she offered Bilbo a wreath of woven leaves and petals. "Lay this where your heart lingers," she whispered. "It will find its way to those you've lost." Bilbo accepted it with gratitude, and that evening, beneath the stars, he laid the wreath beside a lone tree overlooking the hills. And for a moment, the wind carried laughter, faint, familiar, and filled with joy. In the quiet companionship of these wanderers, Bilbo did not feel alone. Their words, their wisdom, their gentle presence all became part of the road he traveled. They had not come to lead him to answers or grant him purpose, but to remind him that every story carried onward through shared memory. Fili and Kili's legacy, etched in stone within Erebor, also lived here, beneath trees, beside fires, in the hearts of those who still walked. And as Bilbo turned homeward at last, the sky above turned to gold, and the breeze felt warm upon his face. The road was long, but never lonely. The night was calm, blanketing the hills in a deep and velvety blue. The stars shimmered like whispers in the heavens, each one a memory, a tale, a name long spoken and never truly forgotten. Bilbo sat near a low-burning campfire, the flames gently crackling like the pages of an old book turning in the wind. Around him sat the quiet wanderers he had met along his journey, Linthariel the elf, Halros the ranger, and the old woman from the glade, now called Merelda, whose stories wove with the earth as if she herself had stepped out from its ancient dreams. The mood was still. The warmth of the fire pressed softly against the cool breath of the evening, and the hush of the trees played like gentle harp strings around them. It was Linthariel who spoke first, her voice low and lyrical, like the rustling of leaves at twilight. "In the first age, when the stars were new," she began, "there was a song sung by Elbereth herself, sung into the waters of Cuivianen, where the elves first awoke. It is said that those waters remember still. Sometimes in deep sleep, elves hear it again, and in hearing it, they remember who they were before the waking of the world." Halros stirred the fire with a stick, thoughtful. "And some say the mountains remember as well," he added. "I've walked the ruined paths of arid Luin, and once in the hush of dawn I heard voices in the stone, a morning song perhaps, for the halls that no longer echo with laughter." Bilbo listened quietly, his fingers wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The flames mirrored the shimmer of memory in his eyes. "I've always thought the stars carried stories," he said softly. "Even before I left the Shire, I used to look at them and wonder what they had seen. Now I know. They've watched everything." Merelda gave a slow nod, plucking a sprig of dried lavender from her satchel. "They are older than kings and kin," she whispered, "older than grief and joy alike. And yet, even the stars weep when brave hearts fall." She reached into her pouch and drew out a small, weathered scroll, unrolling it with care. "This," she said, "is a tale not found in books. It was passed to me by a dwarf who claimed his great-uncle stood watch outside the gates of Erebor before Smaug ever came. He spoke of an old legend, one even the Durin folk whispered only by firelight." Bilbo leaned closer, the light catching the soft edges of the parchment. "The tale speaks of twin stars that fell from the sky, shining gold and silver," Merelda continued. "They landed in the mountains, born into dwarven hearts, brothers, bound by fate. They would walk in joy and die in honor, and their fall would mark the turning of an age." "Fili and Kili," Linthariel whispered, her eyes glistening. "Indeed," Merelda said, "the dwarves believed that stars do not die. They descend, and when they fall, they rise again in song." The group fell into silence, the fire now low and glowing amber. Then Halros spoke once more. "My father told me of the graven tree," he said, his voice slow and firm. "It grows somewhere beyond the Anduin, near the edges of the Forgotten Lands. They say its bark is carved with names, not with tools, but by wind and time. Names of those who fell in battle with courage, their memory etched into the tree by the world itself." He looked toward the sky, where the constellations began to spin above them like ancient wheels of light. "I do not know if it's true," he murmured, "but I like to think that Fili and Kili's names rest there, written not by hands, but by honor." Bilbo felt his throat tighten, not in sorrow, but in a sweet kind of ache, the kind that comes when you remember something precious, something that shaped you, changed you, and still lives within. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded note, a torn piece of parchment he'd kept since the day they left Bag End. Kili had scribbled it, half joking, half sincere. "If we return with gold, I'll buy us all ponies. If we don't, at least we'll have the stories." Bilbo smiled faintly, blinking against the flicker of the firelight. "We did return," he said quietly. "Not all of us, but the stories did." Linthariel nodded slowly, her voice soft as the wind. "And the telling keeps them near. So long as we speak their names with love, they walk beside us." The fire danced low now, casting long, quiet shadows across the grass. In the sky above, 2 stars twinkled a touch brighter than the rest, and for a moment, no one spoke. They simply listened, to the silence, to the stars, to the memory of young dwarves with bold hearts and bright laughter who charged into battle not for gold or glory, but for love. And that, sleepy fellows, that is the kind of tale that lives on, in stone, in song, in stars, and in the hearts of those who remember. The fire had long since dwindled to glowing embers. The sky was a canvas of deep midnight blue, stars scattered like scattered memories, each whispering in its own quiet tongue. Bilbo remained seated beneath the vast sky, the stories of the evening still ringing softly in his mind. Yet something lingered, something not yet spoken, not yet finished. A quiet mystery that had followed him since the mountain, since that terrible day at the foot of Erebor. For all the tales told around the fire, one question remained untouched, veiled in silence. Why had Fili and Kili charged forward into the jaws of certain death? What drove them to fall side by side, far from safety, beneath the shadow of ravenous foes? Bilbo had seen it, had lived it, but had never dared to ask it aloud. Until now, the forest around him stirred, a soft hush sweeping through the tall trees. It was not the wind, it was older, a presence, gentle yet immense. Then from the trees emerged a figure, veiled in twilight, robes that shimmered like moonlight over river stones, and eyes ageless and calm. Not an elf, not a man, something in between, a being of the elder days. "Do not rise," the figure said, voice as quiet as snowfall. "You carry their story in your heart. That is enough to grant you the truth." Bilbo looked up, barely breathing. He nodded, his fingers gripping the note in his pocket. "You wonder why they fell," the figure continued, sitting across from him on the grass, hands resting gently on their knees. "You seek the reason behind the sacrifice, the unspoken vow." "Yes," Bilbo whispered. "No one speaks of it, not clearly. Only that they were brave, that they died defending Thorin." The figure tilted their head slightly, gazing into the firelight's final flicker. "Do you remember the ravens?" they asked. Bilbo frowned, then nodded slowly. "Of course. Ravens flew from Erebor after the battle. I thought it strange. I assumed they carried news. They did, but they carried more than that," the figure said. "They carried memory. Dwarves do not leave behind only stone. They leave behind echoes, recorded not with ink, but with loyalty. Ravens are keepers of such echoes." With a slow motion, the figure extended a hand. In their palm rested a small, black feather, shining faintly in the fire's last glow. "This was carried to me," the figure said, "from the field, from the moment of their fall. Would you hear it, Bilbo Baggins of the Shire?" Bilbo nodded once, the soft weight of the moment pressing over his shoulders like a thick woolen cloak. The figure closed their eyes, and in the hush of the forest clearing, a memory began to unfold, not as sound, not as vision, but as presence. It was the day of the battle. Snow dusted the ruins of Dale. The clouds above had torn open with fury. Thorin Oakenshield had charged from the gates, golden armor gleaming, madness blazing in his eyes. But behind him, two shapes moved swifter than any. Fili and Kili. Their armor bore no crowns. Their blades were swift but simple. Yet they ran not toward the gold, nor the glory. They ran toward the hill where the flanking force of orcs had begun their descent, where they saw with keen eyes what Thorin had not, a trap. "They knew," the figure whispered. "From the start, they knew they would not return, but they also knew that if they did not act, Thorin would fall, and with him, the line of Durin." Bilbo clenched his hands tightly. "But why did no one stop them?" "Because they told no one," the figure said gently, "only each other. In the still hours before dawn, as the horns sounded beyond the gate, Fili and Kili swore a silent vow, not for gold, not for thrones, but for the honor of their uncle, for the legacy of their people. They knew the cost, and they chose it freely." A hush settled again. In the final moment, the figure continued. They stood back to back, blades slick with battle, eyes unafraid, And when Kili fell, Fili did not flee. He knelt beside his brother, even as the last blow fell. Bilbo closed his eyes, feeling the weight of it settle deep in his bones. "They were stars," he murmured, "like the tale Merelda told, stars that descended, and in falling," the figure replied, "they lit the dark." The fire had died, only the starlight remained, bathing the forest in silver. The figure rose, their voice now as soft as the leaves. "There is no need to question their legacy. It was not lost, it was lived, and now it is remembered." Bilbo felt a warmth in his chest, not sorrow, not joy, something between. The ache of something meaningful, the peace of understanding. "And Thorin?" he asked softly. "Did he know?" The figure paused. "In the final breath, yes," they whispered. "He understood. That is why he held their hands before his own final sleep, not as king, as kin." Bilbo nodded. The figure stepped into the shadows once more, fading into the folds of the forest, and Bilbo remained, wrapped in the stars, in memory, and in the quiet truth that had eluded him for so long. The mystery had not been a question, it had been a story waiting to be remembered, and now, sleepy fellows, it has been. Shall we gently end the tale in the final chapter? Hello again, my sleepy fellows. Still with me? Then let's rest now, in the softness that follows a story well told. A tale remembered not for its sorrow, but for the quiet courage woven through its every thread. The fire has long faded, its embers now only a memory, and the moon above drifts like a silver boat through a velvet sea. The stars are gentle and quiet now, as if even they are holding their breath, listening to the lingering echo of Fili and Kili's final stand. It was not gold they died for, not power, not pride. It was for love, love of kin, love of legacy, and love of home, though their home was long buried beneath stone and silence. Their story was not one of grand speeches or songs shouted from high towers. No, their tale was quieter than that, more tender, more human. It was the kind of story whispered around hearths, held in the hearts of those who knew that the greatest heroes are often those who do not expect to be called such. And perhaps now, as you lie beneath your blankets, your own quiet mountain of warmth, you can feel it too, the truth of it, that Middle-earth is not just a place of great quests and terrible battles. It is a place of quiet courage, of loyal hearts, of brothers who fall together so that others may stand. As the stars wheel slowly overhead, Bilbo Baggins, now older, wiser, and more weathered by the years, gazes into the night sky. Somewhere, perhaps in that shimmering light, he sees their faces again, not in sorrow, but in gratitude, in peace. And we too, sleepy fellows, carry the gift of their memory. Tonight, the world is hushed. Even the wind in the trees seems to tiptoe through the leaves. And if you listen very closely, you might just hear it. A raven's wings brushing the sky, a soft whisper of dwarvish song carried on the breeze, or the crackle of a fire long since burned out, but still glowing in the hearts of those who remember. So now, let go, let your eyes grow heavy, let your heart be still, let the warmth of the tale wrap around you like a woolen cloak. And sleep, gentle dreamer, knowing that you are never far from the Shire, never far from the halls of Erebor, and never far from the stars that light the memory of Fili and Kili, two brothers who fell, not into shadow, but into legend. Good night, my sleepy fellows, rest well, and may the stars watch over you until we meet again in another tale beneath the trees.